Okay, it looks like I'm live. Good morning. I am not totally awake today. I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions that were sent on Twitter. I did get a couple of, let me get back to the screen. I did get a couple of sort of fluffy questions. So I guess since I'm still waking up, I'll answer those. So somebody asked where I got my coffee table via email. I actually got it off Free Cycle. So when I moved to Maine, I was just supposed to be here for the summer. I was in law school. I had a summer job with a truly lovely attorney, Francis Jackson. And I was up here and we discovered we were expecting our first child. And I freaked out just a little bit because that wasn't quite on our to-do list yet. And I had been going to school in Philadelphia, and I didn't really want to go back to school in Philadelphia for a newborn because it just wasn't a great environment. There wasn't childcare near where we lived. I didn't know how I was going to manage that. So I checked with Maine Law School to see if I could transfer in. And they said that I could certainly at least be a visiting student for a year if I wanted to stay here. And if I happened to own a home here, then I could get in-state tuition. So we bought a house, and then we had to furnish it in like no time flat with no money because law school is very expensive. So our entire house was furnished with Free Cycle, and the wood coffee table is a remnant from that. We haven't quite destroyed it. Our kids have somehow not destroyed it, but that was something that I picked up from somebody who was getting rid of it. So I don't know where it came from. And then I had somebody else ask what's under it because there's like this mysterious box. And it is actually a blueberry crate that's just filled with random odds and ends and crud that you can never seem to get out of your living room when you have kids. So it's an old wood blueberry crate. It's really sturdy. I may actually pick up a couple of them and give everybody their own blueberry crate. So other questions that I got this morning, I got how we're doing on ballot access. Still working on that. So I did turn in signatures that I had on the 1st of July. And I had a whole bunch of signatures come in, of course, after I turned them in. So I did not turn in the full 4,000. I turned in everything I had, but things just simply hadn't come back from the towns yet. I was still getting things from volunteers, things that I had sent to me. There just simply wasn't time to cure what was wrong. And part of that is we had, I was collecting as much as I could, but we also had some really great volunteers that were trying really hard to hustle and get signatures. It's hard though. I mean, if you're in a really rural area of Maine, trying to collect signatures in a pandemic when you don't have a whole lot of neighbors to begin with is very difficult. So a lot of the stuff I got came back to me, and it came to me and it hadn't made it to the towns yet, or it wasn't notarized, and the mail was really slow. So there just wasn't time to get a lot of the problems cured. I like to do things ahead of time. So, absent pandemic, I would have had all the signatures in probably in early April. Because I don't like being at this deadline. I don't enjoy that feeling of being right up against the wall. But the lawsuit has asked for the state to accept what we turned in as a valid good faith effort. So now we're in the world of the lawsuit. I turned in around over 2,700 signatures, 27 and like almost 2,750. I think it was 2,747 or 46. I have to go back and look at my sheet. That were certified. I turned in more than that, but only that many certified. Sometimes you'll have a duplicate every once in a while, or the signature isn't recognized, or somebody's registered in another town. But again, I have a nice stack that I'm looking at on my desk right now of things that has come in just in the last couple days since then. So just for anybody's reference, independents need 4,000 to get on the ballot, but party candidates only need 2,000. So I turned in substantially more than a party candidate would need to get on the ballot. So not like I turned in like 12. I turned in several thousand. And certainly it was a good faith effort to get on the ballot. So the lawsuit is asking for, look, the party candidates had to turn in 2,000 by March 16th. That was before the pandemic hit. They got to collect that without that extra problem. The non-party candidates had really no accommodations. We had a couple extra weeks, but those extra weeks, the mail was a lot slower. We have to, go outside for recreation or necessary things. But, the advice is still to stay home right now during this pandemic, or, in your yard or not near other people. So we're still, as a whole country, being asked to stay home, although clearly, given the rates of COVID, we're not doing it very well. So, it basically says we were in a pandemic, and a good faith effort should not be hampered by that. So we'll see. We should know by August. I'm going to continue to campaign as if I am on ballot. So you'll still see me doing main raising and being really active and engaged, because I think that our lawsuit has a very good chance of success. It's very reasonable. And if you want to read what it says, I put a link to the papers. I actually need to update because there's been a little bit more filed, but on the website, which is bond4.me. And I didn't ask for anything nuts, or, it's a really reasonable lawsuit that says, hey, we tried. If you can look through and see how much effort I put into working with the Secretary of State and working with the governor's office. They're the only other, big collection that has essentially collected and made it onto the ballot during the pandemic, is there was an effort to repeal ranked choice voting, and even a lot of those signatures were collected before the pandemic hit because they took advantage of the presidential election day. All of us did. Volunteered. They had a lot of volunteers out on that day. So a lot of those signatures were also collected before the pandemic, and they also had a party structure helping them. So, the whole point of this campaign is an average middle class competent person should be able to run for any office, perhaps other than president, in our country. We should be able to run, for state level. We should be able to run for federal level, and it shouldn't take millions of dollars, and it shouldn't take, a team of thousands of people to do it. We should be able to run. I mean, we should be able to participate in our civic society. And if we don't have that opportunity, what are we doing with our democracy? What does it say about our democracy if you have to have millions of dollars or fundraise millions of dollars or have thousands of people on staff to be able to do a job that pays less than $200,000 a year? That's a really important job, but you're not going to attract the sort of people that really care about that job if just the job interview is its own circus production. So that's what we're trying to do with the lawsuit. And that's what I've tried to do with both campaigns that I've run, is we shouldn't have to be raising millions of dollars. While we're on that, some fundraising reports came out this week, and it looks like between the candidates in my race, there's been about another $12 million or so dollars. And that is a phenomenal amount of money for Maine. $12 million maybe doesn't sound like much in a bigger state, or maybe once you get into the millions, the money just sort of all melds together, since most of us will never have millions of dollars in our bank account at one point in time. But that is a mind-blowing amount of money that can buy so much media in Maine that you can't get away from that. And I think most of us are already feeling that. In Maine, you can't get away from this race right now. You can't turn on your TV unless you're on Netflix. If you're on anything that has commercials, it's all you hear about. It's on your phone. It's on your search engine. It's in your mail. Like, there is just, and it's July. So it's going to be obscene. There are PACs being set up all over the country to fund this race. It is ridiculous. This is not what politics should be. This is not what a Senate race should be. That's an auction. That's not an election. And I don't subscribe to the auction theory of politics. I don't think it should be whoever has the most money wins always. I think that's a horrible way to do it. I think it's a horrible way to measure campaigns. Excuse me. I have not had anything to drink yet, so let's see if my tea is cool enough that I can actually have some. So, I think that we're in this space where the money it's farcical. Like, it is a joke at this point in time how much money we have in campaigns and what else we could be doing with that. that money could be enough for the people who are really struggling right now in Maine that are trying to pick between, well, I have to pay rent now because moratoriums are starting to come to an end. And I also have to eat. And oh, by the way, like a whole bunch of unemployment claims are on hold because there was some fraud that I didn't have anything to do with, right? Like them individuals, most people had nothing to do with. So that is just an obscene amount of money, and we've got to get away from that. We've got to push our media away from that. That seems to be what our media covers is, oh, somebody raised $1 bazillion. And I think that instead of going, oh my gosh, that's amazing, our response would be, why? Why would you need that much money? Why are your ideas and your quality of strength and debate and your ability to communicate with others, especially since right now we can only be doing a lot of virtual campaigning. So we have things like this breakfast at Tiffany's where it's a direct communication with you. You have the ability to ask questions and I answer them. You have the ability to get directly to a candidate. I do 2 of these a week, right? I do a Tuesday town hall, I do this. So we have the ability to interact with people. We have the ability to be on social media more. Why do we need that much money? What is wrong with the quality of our candidates that we can't push back on the media and say, okay, if you really want to distill us down to sound bites, which is not the best way to run for office, but if you really want to do that, then fine, publish a weekly grid of who all the candidates are and the hot topics and how each of them feels about it, and give them a paragraph quote, and have there be a page for federal level candidates, or a page for each office. And that's news coverage I want to see. That's what I would want to subscribe to is this last week, okay, what's whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's how do you feel about tribal sovereignty, give each candidate who is a bona fide candidate, here is their quote on the hot topic of the week. Right? Why are we making this about how much money we can throw at things? And it's wasteful. It's wasteful. It's abusive. I've said this before, but my mother, lives in Seattle. She's retired. She's on, and she gets emails almost every single day asking her for money in this race. You should not be emailing my mother asking her for money more than I ask her for money. And I don't ask her for money very often, so, and I should not ask her for money very often. I'm in my 40s. There's no reason to be, repeatedly hitting up my mother for hobbies. And she shouldn't be getting emails every day asking her for $3 or $25. It's insane. And it's abusive. I mean, we are in a pandemic. Even during regular times, asking people for money that frequently is really inappropriate. But if you're doing it in a pandemic when people don't know if they're going to be working, and I think that more of the population, especially after this last week or so, is really catching on to the fact that this pandemic was horribly mismanaged, and it is not going away. We are going to be dealing with this until January at the absolute earliest. Our curve is obscene right now. And so you're asking people when they don't know if they're going to have jobs. Often people are stuck at home with their children, trying to figure out how to make ends meet, trying to figure out about money. I mean, I've been talking to my own children a lot about, the impacts of what happens when you're in a position where a lot of people are losing their jobs. We try to shield them from a lot of the realities of the world because they're 7 and 9, but we still try to talk to them in age appropriate ways about life events and make sure that we're shaping how they should have compassion and how they should have their own prudence and planning. And so, watching that, I can't believe we're in a position where campaigns are begging every single day for money, and people just don't have it. And when they do have it, they're throwing it at races like ours, where I don't know, maybe we should have to publish, this is how much airtime costs in Maine compared to other places, because it is a phenomenally obscene amount of money. And when I saw people celebrating the amount of money that was going into this race, it made me so sad, because we do have people who are suffering in Maine. We do have people in Maine who don't have food, who are food insecure, who don't have a way to pay rent, and we don't have social services that are adequate to provide for that need right now. And that could have filled that gap. That it's just awful that we're there. So that actually brings me to a question Well, before I move on to that, hold on. They have to buy ads on TV so old people will see them. That's what the majority of money is for. I think that that's a prevailing thought. I don't know how accurate that is, though. Yeah, a lot of us are watching TV now, but a lot of us have subscription-based services where we don't even see that anymore. Um, and I don't know how effective the ads are. They're running the same ad over and over and over and over again. And I shouldn't have to have like these ads memorized. I don't want to hear about them. I use YouTube and I play music in the background, and I'm sure that you guys have I'm sure that you guys have noticed that I used to like put on threads when I was cooking, and where I was playing random music, and I would tell you the music that I was playing. I had to stop doing that because it's every other break. I get like 2 songs, and then it was an ad about this election. It was just it was just too much. So I'm now singing to myself or pulling out my CD collection. My CD collection is not extremely extensive, and it's probably a little bit more 90s focused than a lot of my audience, and a little bit more, I grew up in Seattle in the 90s focused than a lot of my audience. So I've got a comment that repeating things bores it into their brain. It can, but I think that repeating things also really annoys people. And the messaging that's being used in this race by the top 2 is really ineffective. It's bad. It is 2 women who have power in legislature right now, that currently are in power, that currently could be making choices to help people that aren't doing a thing that is functionally helping people, pointing at each other saying, look at this woman in leadership who is not doing a thing. We've got, Susan Collins, who is taking credit for the PPP, which I have a PPP loan. It is a cluster and a half. And it's also going to be totally inadequate. This thing's going to drag on. And part of the PPP is you had to sign something saying you weren't going to take any more federal help if you took it. And I'm okay because the courts have opened a little bit, and my husband has started back at a job where he's out at sea, which gives me a whole new challenge to be doing this all by myself with kids. But the courts are probably going to have to close back up again, or modify themselves again based on what we're seeing in national trends. And if I didn't have a second income coming into the house, I would be hosed. So we're in a position where essentially, we're throwing this amount of money at ads for 2 women that are just not effective in their job right now and have full control. So I don't know. It must be hard for the marketing people. How do you put either one of those people forward and say, oh yeah, this person's totally helping you, but the other person's not helping you worse. And yeah, that's it. I've been seeing a lot of ads lately that are talking about, oh, there's capped insulin prices. Well, the bill to cap insulin prices caps them at 10 times what studies have said they should be capped at. So thanks for capping my prices at 10 times what they should be. Maybe the bill hasn't fully passed. So I think that this particular race is going to be completely farcical. There's just we don't have good people writing our law, and they might not be bad people as individuals, but they're not great for the job. And that's, I think, our biggest problem is we hire people that aren't good for this job, and they put the job in a different space than it should be. So I actually was bantering a little bit with somebody last night about what the job should be, and I think the job is to go and focus on the law and make sure your first obligation before anything is to make sure that our federal government is working. I think that is the most important thing that Congress does, is our federal government functional on a fundamental level. And I've had people argue with me, oh no, your job is to represent the state. Well, you represent the state too. But, your state has people babysitting it and watching out for it, right? Like, you have a governor, you have a state legislature. Their job is to watch out for the state. Their job is to make sure the state functions. The job of Congress is really to make sure that the federal government functions. And yes, you were absolutely there to bring your state's perspective. You were absolutely there to provide constituent services and make sure that when your state, people from your state or your state itself needs to interact with the federal government, that that there's a conduit for that. But the job is to focus on the law, make sure that the law is intact, make sure that the law is good, and make sure that the government is functioning. And I think we've seen a lot of failures that we haven't been focusing on that for a long time. Flint still is maybe not having great water. Puerto Rico still is functioning without full power and water. So those are some really good examples of what happens when people focus so much on their state that they're forgetting about the country not functioning. So elections should be more about why I should vote for someone instead of why I shouldn't vote for the other person. I think I agree with that generally. I think that I talk about a lot of what I think the job should be, but I think there is a point where you have to say, look, I'm running for this job because the people in the race are maybe not making the best choices, and I'm not going to slash and burn them, but I am going to say, like, these are not wise choices. And this is why I would bother to put myself out there. I look at Susan Collins, and we had the government argue this week that they cannot release children who are in our concentration camps because the parents have only authorized for the children to be, or the families who the family would go stay with, and they didn't provide explicit permission for only the children to go. And so it's not a relevant piece of information. Why are we keeping families in concentration camps? I mean, like, that is, I'd like to say, that's a Nazi move, but the fact of the matter is we've done that historically, and we need to not do that anymore. It's a human rights violation. We've kept our own citizens in concentration camps, and it's horrible. We should not do that. We should not be interning our own citizens who are not at risk of committing violent acts in society. We shouldn't be holding people who are not at risk of being violent in our society generally. If somebody needs to be deported, that's another matter. But not only is it exponentially more cost effective for us to throw an ankle band on somebody if we think they're a flight risk than it is to incarcerate them, but it's more humane. I mean, how we treat people, that talks about us too. It's not just about what the other person's behavior is, it's about what we have done and who we are as people. And I don't think we should be incarcerating people for a lot of what we're incarcerating people for. I feel like I have a point at the end that was supposed to go at the beginning, but I'm actually going to punt that a little bit further. And while we're talking about incarceration, a whole bunch of people got arrested yesterday because they were protesting up by Mount Rushmore. And when we're talking about us needing to be the best version of ourselves, or at least aspiring and trying to take steps for that, we have treaties that we only honor when it's convenient for our government, and that's not what a treaty is. So we need to be making sure that we are striving for our government to be the best version of itself all the time, and that means honoring treaties, even if it is inconvenient, even if it is expensive, even if it is annoying. Those are legally binding agreements that we entered into. And I had somebody tell me the other day, oh yeah, but the treaty that we had with those that tribe, like, that was a long time ago. It was more recent than our Constitution, and we treat our Constitution as a hallowed, sacred document, albeit one that every once in a while needs an update. But so we need to be honoring those agreements, even if it's inconvenient. And that tribe did legal action against the United States, and they won a suit that would be worth about $1 billion today. And they didn't want the money; they wanted their land back. They wanted that recourse. And we need to start honoring our agreements to other sovereignties and to our citizens. The way that our government interacts with their citizens is not healthy. And so that brings me back around to the point that I was going to get to at the very beginning, which is I got a question that was sent to me on Twitter. How do we handle parents being home with kids and it looking like that we're going to go into the fall without school? I was so hopeful a month ago that maybe we would have school in the fall, but It's been really clear. Texas had 300 children test positive for COVID at childcare. There was an event in California where I think it was about 40 administrators met in person to talk about reopening, and now they're all quarantined for COVID. So I think that we are deeply underestimating how contagious this is, and I think that we have just absolutely screwed up how we support our residents through this. So if you've watched me, I've advocated for this a long time ago. I'm still advocating it for now. What we need is, I've never been fully sold on UBI, but I wanted more data and I wanted to collect more information about it. If we're gonna run a test on UBI, now is when we run that test on UBI. I've been kind of waiting to let other countries finish up their results on it, but this is a time that you put in UBI. This is a time when you say, look, we're not going to give you enough money that you're going to be rolling the dough. Nobody is going to get Scrooge McDuck off of a UBI, but a couple $1,000s per adult per month ongoing until we've met X, and whatever X is. And X might be, once we're no longer under a national emergency for COVID, or, within 90 days of having an available vaccine, or, it goes on for 90, you have to get your vaccine if you want one within X amount of days, unless you have a medical exemption. I don't know what the triggers will be, but we should have some sort of UBI that is ongoing, a lesser amount for children, so that there's food and supplies for kids. And I think we really need to do a wraparound Medicaid right now. A lot of people are losing insurance, and we're going to be paying for COVID-related expenses one way or the other. And if people are not getting treatment for COVID, it's going to spread worse than it is right now. So what we need to be doing is we need to be saying, okay, we're going to create a special program for Medicaid. There's not going to be copays, and it's, if you have insurance, it'll work with your insurance. You're not going to see any copays. You're not going to see any uptick. It's not going to cover every single thing. This is only designed for, COVID and maybe emergency medical care. Right now, we don't have a mechanism to flip over to it all being this. It would be catastrophic to do so. But, if you've lost your insurance because you never had in the first place, or you're homeless, or you've lost your job, we're going to do a wraparound Medicaid so that you can absolutely get tested for COVID, and you can get treated for COVID, and any other emergency procedures that bring you to the hospital, so we can get you in and out quickly, and we can get you healthy, and we can get this under control. And we really need to do those two things, and they need to be reoccurring, and they need to not need continual authorization, because as we have seen, what is going to happen if they need continual authorization is one or both parties is going to use that for leverage. And, it's fairly smart to use it for leverage, but when you're using people for leverage, you're harming people while you're waiting. And that's not okay in a pandemic. So one of the questions that somebody had asked was, how do we support parents and children that we're not getting the social interaction? And I think one of the ways we do that is make sure that they have food, make sure that they have housing, make sure that they have access to technology. We're going to have to do something about broadband. We need some sort of mechanism, although this is probably going to be state level, so we'll have to push resources out to the state to make sure that, like, we have laptops that we've checked out from the school that just don't meet the needs of our household. So we either in our household need to figure out how to buy 2 more computers, which, wasn't in our budget or on our to-do list. And we, or we need to figure out how to have packets, and that's an expense too. So we need to have some sort of educational benefit. I think that we need to figure out how to have safe, more personal interactions. I think the computer helps a little bit, but it's also very awkward. I work from home, and so my kids' school meetings are during the same period that I would interact with clients, and the school records all of those meetings to protect themselves, which means I can't be anywhere in earshot and still do my job. And I can't be the only parent that's up against that. I can't have my work recorded and stored by somebody else because I'm an attorney, so it's confidential. But a lot of people's work is confidential. It's not just me. So that is problematic. We need to work on making sure that we have healthier foods available for people. We may need to bump up our food stamp budget because food stamps, they're enough that you don't starve. They're not enough that you're eating a whole lot of produce or meat most of the time. So we probably need to bump up our food stamp budget, particularly in households with children. We need to make sure that people can get delivery. Something that you can individually do to help the tide that's coming is I started telling people again. I told the people this in late February. I'm telling people now. The supply chains seem to be working right now. That may not be the case later. So stock up on groceries again, as long as you're in an area where supply chains are working well. Buy an extra couple of packs of toilet paper, buy personal hygiene items that won't go bad, buy some shelf stable goods, because what's going to happen is we're going to have another run on things, and there are people who cannot afford to stock ahead. So if you are middle class and you have a decent sized pantry, it is incumbent on you to make that dip and that lack of supplies less drastic for people who don't have a choice. So if you're watching this right now, please do a little bit of perfunctory planning. Right now, food stocks are ample. We've got, across the country, we're in our grow season and harvest season. Go to the farmer's market, get some berries. And I've been making jam, which I'm really bad at. But, give it a try. Do what you can to make sure that you have stocks available and you have shelf-stable things available. Stock up your freezer and keep it stocked. And do it a little bit at a time right now, because in the, plant a garden is what somebody said. Maine has a really short growing season compared to a lot of places. But if you're in a place that doesn't, plant a garden. And gardens don't have to be big. You can have window gardens. When I lived in an apartment in my 20s, I used to, had a little balcony. You could grow stuff there. So make sure that you're taking that pressure off. I feel bad that I don't have a big solution for the question of how do we keep the social interaction going and parents sane. But I think that's probably not a federal question. I think that's a state question. I think that's something that different states are going to have different needs for. For example, in Maine in the winter, it may be very difficult to come up with ways that people can interact together outside in a healthy and safe way when, it's a blizzard here. it's going to be very regional. It's going to be very regional and culturally specific, but we should have some more supports in place. I would love to say that we have some sort of, national helpline for parents, particularly people in general, but parents particularly struggling with being teachers. But I don't see our Congress as functional enough to get that off the ground, unfortunately. So let me get a couple more of these questions. Testing UBI, Medicaid is too threatening to the establishment. Well, the establishment can pound sand. So at some point in time, you just need to make sure that you're taking care of your citizens. And that's one of the things that I talk about a lot, is that we have a really unhealthy relationship with our government. And so many of our systems are designed to make sure that poor people aren't abusing them. Wealthy people, they're too expensive to prosecute, so they just get away with murder and literally billions more abuse than anybody poor does. And that's just not a healthy relationship. And that doesn't mean changing it so that, the poor people get to get away with that fraud and the rich people don't. It means that, yeah, there's fraud in any system, but catch it on the backside. Don't treat people like they're committing fraud going into a system. I had somebody tell me that if we had UBI through the pandemic, then nobody would go back to work. I mean, first of all, nobody should be forced to go back to work if they don't feel safe. We're supposed to be the richest country in the world. And if we're the richest country in the world, I think we can probably afford to let people be safe at work. Second, I don't much care what your personal failings are. The UBI that I'm suggesting and that is regularly suggested is bare minimum survival UBI. And, that's not going to be adequate for people who have, for example, disabilities. It needs to not disqualify for disabilities. It's saying, hey, you get bread and milk, but that's it. You have a place to sleep, maybe. People are more motivated than that. There will be a certain segment of people that are not, but those people are often on the street already anyway. And for all the people who are super duper annoyed with homeless people in the street getting in their way and ruining their perfect views, which is not maybe the most healthy perspective to have, it's helping you too. It's giving you what you want, and it's more cost effective. I can tell you for a fact, there are people in Maine that commit petty crime just so they have food. And that's awful. I've had people tell me that, essentially they stole a small item so it wouldn't be a huge consequence and it wouldn't screw up their record too much, but it was cold and they needed a place to be. And that is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear that. And I've heard it more than once. So it is really sad that we have people who have better luck getting social services by stealing than getting social services by just saying, hey, government, I need help. So we need to change our relationship with our government, and our government should be there and say, not I'm going to do it for you. I don't think that we're looking for a government that does everything for us, but our government should be there to say, what are the barriers to you being successful? And let's work on those together. Let's make sure you have everything that you need to be able to pick it up and go the rest of the way on your own. And I think that we haven't had that. I think that we've had a really minimal social safety net. It is not adequate by any means. And I think that overall stress level that it just gives us as a nation, that tenseness that we have as a nation, is really unhealthy, particularly in times of pandemic. I've gotten a few more questions, so I'm going to read those. I feel like I need readers being old now. So stock up on extra food for pantry donations. Yes, you should do that if you can afford it. You should be contributing to food banks. You're going to probably see some Maine raisings that focus on food banks again. I sort of had to pull back on a lot of the campaign stuff, working on the signatures and the lawsuit. It just was sucking a lot of my time, and I was happy to give it, but I also have children and I have a responsibility to be a functional parent. So there's a limit X on my time that I had to honor. So planted potatoes now will be mature to harvest. So yep, it's a great time to plant potatoes. It's a great time to plant fall crops. It's a great time to plant starts that you get at a nursery. Probably not a great time to start from seed unless you're going to be growing in your window. And pet food for pantry donations too. Yep, this is also a really good time to stock up on pet food. Pet food has a generally longer shelf life than a lot of other things. So we actually need to buy some here. So when you go to the pet store, make sure you're buying some extra. And if you have the ability, make sure to donate some as well. The media is downplaying the connection between people going back to work and the spike in COVID infections. I think the media is just as overwhelmed as we are right now. And we need to be pushing on the media for the information we need, whether it's the spike in COVID infections and the cause for that. And of course, it's opening things up that's causing it. Of course, it's people being, in public, some of whom don't enjoy masks. Of course, as we have more in-person interactions, we are going to see spikes in that. My mouth is getting a little dry. This has not been a great week for me for sleep. I've had a lot going on. The courts have they've been slowly reopening, but I had multiple half-day mediation sessions, and in probably not the most healthy parenting available. Our mechanism to survive at home has been to let the children stay up a little later than we normally would, so we get a couple hours in the morning that they're still asleep, which is why at 8:45 they're still asleep during the school year. They usually are not, but we've been letting them stay up a little later and read and watch movies with us. And that way we do get a couple hours in the morning, but that kind of shortchanges us on our stuff as parents. So mask donations too, yeah. And I think that mask donations are a good thing to have. Masks, sanitizer, any of those things that you have the ability to donate to social service organizations. I wish I could say that I thought our government was going to make sure that social service organizations had everything they need, but they're just not. I mean, our Congress is not motivated in the state of Maine. Our state legislature apparently just isn't gonna do a functional emergency session. I don't understand. I've heard that the soonest they may come back is August, and I don't, at that point in time, I don't know why the states aren't taking more action. I don't know why state legislatures aren't having more that they do to address this, because even though there are real limitations on the states cannot print money, and we need to be fair and in the standard that we hold them to, and that they can't print money. They do have a budget. There are limitations on what they can do for things like rent relief, because that money has to come from somewhere. The federal government can print money, and the federal government can absolutely be that support, but the states aren't really, at least a lot of the state legislatures don't seem to be taking this up. The state of Maine legislature is just peaced out for this. So it's a real shame that they did a short emergency session and they haven't even tried to come back remotely to handle this, because it is best addressed. These issues are best addressed, most of them, at the state level. Redirecting need is best addressed at the state level. And we have a governor who seems to be, despite not responding to any of my inquiries about how candidates could safely interact during this period, she does seem to be working diligently on it, but she's one person. A state legislature should be supporting their governor right now. It's really disappointing to me that in this state, our state legislature has just decided to not. And we have a part-time legislature, and I think this is showing us a really excellent reason that the state of Maine might want to invest in a full-time professional legislature instead of a part-time sort of hobbyist legislature. And when I say hobbyist, I don't mean to belittle the work they're doing. I mean that the way they are compensated and the way that the calendar runs makes it very difficult for them to do any other job. But it doesn't compensate enough that it's a living wage. So you have to be able to do it as a sort of. This week has been a little crazy. We haven't really gotten to that much of this week's events. We talked a little bit about sovereignty and respecting treaties. We talked a little bit about arrests. We talked a little bit about COVID. We talked a little bit of a lawsuit update. If there's anything urgent you all want to talk about, let me know in the question box. We're running kind of long on time, and I want to make sure that anybody who has questions gets them answered, and anybody who watches this later isn't like, oh my gosh, this is longer than Hamilton. So I don't see any other questions coming in. I'll be back on Tuesday. You're going to start seeing me push a little harder for campaign type activities. So you're going to see more of me asking about Maine raisings. You're going to, it looks like the thread that I've had going since February, the sort of documenting COVID. And for those who haven't seen, there is our dramatic cat who is making an appearance. So I'm probably going to be providing more information on COVID as it becomes available. We know a lot more about it now than we used to. Please wear a mask. Have several. I ended up having to wear one of my children's masks the other day because I got in the car and all of mine were, drying from being washed. Buy some backups if you can afford it. Buy from local small businesses if you can afford it. Do everything you can to be supporting local businesses right now. The supports that are in place to try and help small businesses survive on a federal and state level are inadequate. Buy from small business if at all possible, because those small businesses are the lifeblood of states and towns, and we are not taking care of them at all. It is not good enough. The PPP was not good enough. Do we know of a Maine business that sells masks that you can support? Oh my gosh. So there's a ton of businesses themselves that sell them, but if you go on Etsy and you can look by just by Maine, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of masks available that are handcrafted. Some of them are custom. Some of them are really cute. Some of them are very perfunctory. I like things like Etsy just because a lot of the sellers on Etsy, some of them, have businesses that are full-time businesses and that we're supporting. But a lot of the people that are on Etsy, that is like the money they survive and get by on. So I tend to refer people to Etsy a lot because it does really help kind of that gap of those people that are living in the margins. But also because it has a wide variety and it's all in one spot. Maine doesn't really have a centralized, well, anything. Maine doesn't have a centralized anything. That's what makes Maine Maine. So, but I know that we've gotten several different masks from several different suppliers on Etsy, and they've all been great and they've all timely come. So make sure that you are wearing masks everywhere. Make sure there hasn't been any data at all that shows that curbside or drive-through is in any way dangerous to at least the consumers. Working in those environments might be a little bit challenging because they are close together, but it doesn't seem to be a point of contagion. So I am aware of no transmission from curbside delivery or pickup or takeout in the state of Maine, or even nationally. I have heard of no reports that takeout is where people got sick, or that getting their groceries by curbside or getting their groceries delivered. So employ those methods as you can. What we do know about COVID is it is not great to go into enclosed spaces for extended periods of time, particularly if you have a mask off. So I have not dined inside of any restaurants. I have no intention of dining inside of any restaurants until we're on the back side of this thing. We have gotten some takeout, and takeout's been great. A lot of the restaurants that didn't maybe previously do takeout, or their takeout before was kind of have really seemed to go the extra mile and made takeout a lot more substantial. Like the menus, there's more available. Packaging has been better. We're able to get things all the way home and they're still hot. So definitely, support small businesses that way. If you have a favorite restaurant that you really want to be there on the backside of this, get takeout, maybe once a week if it's in your budget. But do what you can to be supporting those small businesses. I hear my little monkeys stirring upstairs. So I'm going to let you all go. I will be back on Tuesday. If you have questions, you can email them in through the website. You can send me messages on social media, or you can pop onto one of these. It's always open forum. I never have anything planned. So I've had a lot of people be like, "Oh, you use a lot more ums and uhs," and it's because I'm literally just freeform talking without prompts. So these events are not at all scripted, and that's how it should be. We should know who we're really getting. I've had a few judges that have told me that I seem to accept cases warts and all, and I think that that's what we should get. We should get our candidates warts and all. We should get our cases warts and all. We should get the job of being in Congress, warts and all. We have to fix the bad stuff too. So I will see you guys online and on Tuesday. I hope you have a truly great 4th of July.